Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Please consider subscribing and check out our Patreon for more. Enjoy the video. Growing up, I always knew I was different. My name is Sam, and my story isn't like everyone else's. I lived with my dad, just the two of us, since my mom passed away when I was very young. My dad was a good man, but he had his own ideas about how things should be, especially for me. I remember this one time when I was about 7. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind where the raindrops sounded like little drums against the window. I was in my mom's old room, which still had all her things just as she left them. Her clothes hung in the wardrobe, her perfumes lined up on the dresser. Everything about that room whispered her presence. I was drawn to a scarf of hers, a soft floral one that smelled faintly of her perfume. I wrapped it around my neck, the fabric feeling like a gentle hug. It felt right, like it belonged there. But then I heard my dad's footsteps. In a panic, I yanked the scarf off and shoved it back into the drawer. My heart was pounding as he walked in. He didn't see the scarf, just me standing there looking guilty. "What are you doing in here, Sam?" he asked, his voice stern. "Nothing, just looking," I mumbled, avoiding his gaze. He sighed. "This room is not for playing, Sam, remember that." His tone wasn't mean, just firm, and that was that. I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat, and left the room. That wasn't the only time I felt this pull towards things that weren't meant for me. Clothes, makeup, the way some girls at school talked and laughed. It all seemed like a world I wanted to be part of, but couldn't. I knew my dad wouldn't understand. He was traditional, believing boys should do boy things and girls should do girl things. So I learned to hide these feelings, to bury them deep inside. I did boy stuff, played sports, hung out with my friends, and tried to be the son I thought my dad wanted. But those feelings never went away. They were always there under the surface, waiting. My dad never knew about the times I'd sneak into Mom's room when he was out, trying on her clothes, looking at myself in the mirror, and seeing a different me, a me I kept hidden from the world. I'd carefully put everything back exactly how I found it, making sure there was no evidence of my secret explorations. But as I got older, those feelings got stronger. It wasn't just about the clothes or the makeup anymore. It was about who I was, who I wanted to be. I felt trapped in a life that wasn't mine, playing a role that didn't fit. I remember lying in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, and feeling this heavy sadness. I missed my mom, who I barely remembered, and I wished more than anything that I could talk to her, ask her what I should do. But that was impossible, and I was alone with my secret, a secret that was getting harder to keep every day. My dad noticed something was off, of course. He'd ask if everything was okay, if there was anything I wanted to talk about. But how could I tell him? How could I explain something I didn't fully understand myself? So I'd just shrug and say everything was fine, even though it wasn't. As I grew into my teenage years, the gap between me and my dad seemed to widen. He tried to connect with me, taking me to baseball games, talking about cars, things he thought a boy my age would be interested in. But my heart wasn't in it. I felt like I was living two lives, the one my dad saw and the real one, hidden away, only coming out in those stolen moments alone in my mom's room. I knew this couldn't go on forever. The more I suppressed who I was, the more miserable I felt. It was like wearing clothes that were too tight, constricting, suffocating. I needed to be free, to be myself. But the fear of losing my dad, the only family I had, held me back. I'd watch him, this strong, silent man who had raised me on his own, and wonder if he'd still love me if he knew the truth. Would he yell? Would he tell me I was wrong, that I needed to change? These thoughts kept me awake at night, tossing and turning, wrestling with my secret. Sometimes I'd think back to those early days, right after Mom passed away. My dad was lost then, trying to figure out how to be a parent on his own. He'd look at me with this mix of love and uncertainty, like he was trying to read a manual that just didn't exist. I knew he loved me in his way, but was that love conditional? Would it stretch to encompass the real me? The pressure of those thoughts, the weight of my hidden identity, it was all becoming too much. I knew I couldn't keep living like this, pretending to be someone I wasn't. But the thought of telling my dad, of seeing the look on his face when I revealed my true self was terrifying. So I kept quiet, kept hiding, kept living a half-life, and every day it got a little bit harder to breathe, a little bit harder to pretend. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath my feet, and it was only a matter of time before I fell. As a teenager, things inside me felt more confusing than ever. I knew I was different, but I didn't know how to tell my dad. I was afraid he wouldn't understand, and I didn't want to upset him. So I kept my feelings locked away like a secret I couldn't share. One day, I decided I couldn't keep it a secret anymore. I was tired of hiding who I was. I needed my dad to know, even if it scared me. I waited for a day when we were both at home and the house was quiet. My heart was racing as I sat down next to him. "Dad," I started, my voice shaking a little. "There's something I need to tell you. It's important." He looked at me, a little surprised. "What is it, Sam? You can tell me anything." I took a deep breath. "I don't feel like I'm just your son. Inside, I feel different, like I'm not supposed to be a boy." My dad's face changed. He looked confused, then upset. "What are you talking about, Sam? This doesn't make any sense." I tried to explain, but the words didn't come out right. "I just don't feel right as a boy. I feel like I should be a girl." My dad got really angry. He stood up and started pacing around the room. "No, Sam, this is nonsense. You're my son, and that's that. I don't want to hear any more about this." I felt like crying. It was like a big wall had come up between me and my dad. I wanted him to understand, but he just couldn't. He was too angry, too upset. That night, I lay in my bed, feeling lonelier than ever. I had hoped telling my dad would make things better, but it only made them worse. I felt like I was all alone, with no one who understood me. Days passed and things at home got harder. My dad didn't talk about our conversation, but things were different. He was quieter, and sometimes he looked at me like he didn't know who I was. It hurt, feeling like my dad was so far away, even though he was right there. I started spending more time alone in my room. When I was by myself, I could be who I wanted to be, even if it was just for a little while. I would look at pictures online of dresses and makeup, imagining what it would be like to wear them, to be the person I felt like inside. But those moments were short, and then reality would come back. I would look in the mirror and see the same face, the same boy that everyone else saw. It felt like I was trapped, like I was in a play where I had to be someone I wasn't. I wished more than anything that I could just be myself, that I could show my dad who I really was and have him understand. But that felt like an impossible dream, something that could never happen. I fell asleep each night hoping for a change, hoping that somehow things would get better. But when I woke up, it was always the same. The same room, the same house, the same life where I couldn't be me. I knew I had to find a way to be myself, even if it was hard, even if it meant going against what my dad wanted. It was the only way I could be happy. But every time I thought about doing something, fear would hold me back. I was scared of making my dad angry again, scared of losing the only family I had. So days turned into weeks, and I kept everything inside. I would go to school, come home, and pretend everything was normal. But inside, I felt like I was screaming for someone to see the real me. Then, one day, I found an old box of my mom's makeup in the back of her closet. It was like finding a hidden treasure. I looked at the eyeshadows, the lipsticks, all these colors and tools to create a different face. A face that felt more like the real me. Crazy how my dad never threw this away. I waited until a day when my dad was out for a long time. My hands were shaking as I took the makeup out and started experimenting with it. I didn't really know what I was doing, but it felt amazing. With each brush stroke, I felt like I was painting the real me, bringing her to life. I found some of my mom's old clothes, too. Dresses, skirts, things I had never dared to try on before. I dressed up, standing in front of the mirror, and for the first time, I saw a glimpse of the person I felt like inside. It was scary, but also exciting. It felt right. I started doing this whenever I had the chance, whenever my dad was away. It was my secret, my way of being me, even if it was just for a little while. I would put everything away carefully before he came back, making sure everything looked just like it did before. But even these secret moments weren't enough. It was like living in a dream and then having to wake up to a world where I couldn't be me. I wished I could just be the person in the mirror, the girl with the bright eyes and the smile that felt real. Every time my dad left the house, I had a new chance to be myself. I would hurry to my mom's room and start my transformation. It was like stepping into a different world, a world where I could be happy. I got better at using makeup. I learned how to make my eyes look bigger and how to color my lips in pretty shades. I would stand in front of the mirror, amazed at how different I looked. The boy in the mirror was gone, and in his place was a girl with bright, hopeful eyes. Dressing up in my mom's clothes was my favorite part. I loved the feeling of the soft fabrics against my skin. I would twirl in front of the mirror, watching the dresses swirl around me. For a little while, I could pretend that everything was okay, that I was just a normal girl with a normal life. But I always had to watch the clock. I knew I couldn't get caught. So I would carefully take off the makeup, fold the clothes, and put everything back exactly how it was. It was like saying goodbye to myself every time. One day, I lost track of time. I was wearing one of my mom's dresses, a pretty blue one that made me feel like a princess. I was dancing in front of the mirror, lost in the moment, when I heard the front door open. My heart stopped. I had never been so scared in my life. I knew I had to change back before my dad saw me, but it was too late. He called my name and his footsteps were coming closer. I tried to take off the dress, but my hands were shaking too much. The door opened and there was my dad, standing in the doorway, his eyes wide with shock. "What is this?" he asked, his voice angry and confused. "Sam, what are you doing?" I couldn't speak. I just stood there, frozen, feeling like the whole world was crashing down around me. My dad was furious. He yelled things I had never heard him say before. He said I was wrong, that I was embarrassing him, that I was not the son he knew. I felt so small and scared. I wanted to explain, to make him understand, but I couldn't find the words. All I could do was cry. My dad told me to never do this again. He said if I ever wore dresses or makeup again, he would kick me out of the house. I had never seen him so angry. That night, I lay in bed feeling like everything was over. My secret was out and my dad hated me for it. I felt like I had no place in the world, like there was no one who would ever understand me. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I had lost everything. My dad, who was my whole world, now looked at me like I was a stranger. I felt so alone, so lost, with nowhere to turn. I knew I couldn't stay in a house where I wasn't accepted, where I couldn't be myself. So I made a decision. It was the hardest decision I had ever made, but I felt like I had no choice. One morning, before my dad woke up, I packed a small bag with some clothes and left a note on the kitchen table. The note just said, "I'm sorry." Then I left the house, not knowing where I was going or what I was going to do. I had never felt so scared and alone. But I also felt a little bit of relief, like I was finally breathing after being underwater for so long. I was stepping into the unknown with nothing but a small bag and a heart full of fear and hope. The first few days were the hardest. I didn't know where to go or what to do. I found a little park where I could sleep at night. It wasn't comfortable, but it was better than going back to a home where I couldn't be myself. I was always hungry and cold. I missed my bed, my house, even my dad. But every time I thought about going back, I remembered the look on his face when he saw me in the dress. I couldn't face that again. I met other kids who were also living on the streets. They all had their own stories, their own reasons for being there. Some of them were nice, and we would talk about our lives and our dreams. But it was still hard living like that, never knowing where my next meal would come from or if I would be safe. I thought a lot about who I was during those days. I knew I wasn't the son my dad wanted, but I also knew I had to be true to myself. It was the only way I could be happy. But being happy seemed like a dream that was too far away. As the days turned into weeks, I started to lose hope. I wondered if I would ever have a home again, if I would ever feel safe and loved. I missed my dad, But I didn't know if he missed me or if he was just glad I was gone. I would sit in the park and watch the other families. They all seemed so happy and normal. I wondered if I would ever have that again, a family that loved me for who I was. But even in my darkest moments, there was a small part of me that still hoped that things would get better, that I would find a place where I belonged. I held on to that hope, even when it was just a tiny spark in the darkness. It was all I had, and I wasn't going to let it go. Living on the streets was hard. I was always hungry and cold, and I missed the comforts of home. But even in the toughest moments, I knew I had made the right choice. I couldn't go back to pretending to be someone I wasn't. Sometimes I would think about my dad. Did he miss me? Did he worry about where I was? Deep down, I hoped he did. I hoped he would understand why I had to leave. But as the days passed, I started to lose hope. Maybe he was glad I was gone. Back at our house, things were different for my dad after I left. The first few days, he was still angry. He thought I would come back, that I was just upset. But as the days turned into a week and then two, he started to worry. The house felt empty without me. My dad would walk past my room and see it just as I left it, with no sign of me coming back. He started to think about the last time we talked, the anger in his voice, the hurt in my eyes. He wished he could take it all back, but he didn't know how. At first, he tried to convince himself that I was wrong, that I would realize it and come back home. But deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. He remembered how unhappy I looked, how I never seemed to fit in with the other kids. My dad began to miss me, the sound of my voice, my laughter around the house. He started to think about all the things he might have done wrong, how he could have been there for me more. He wished he had listened to me, tried to understand what I was going through. He asked my friends if they had seen me, but no one knew where I was. He even went to the police, but they said there was not much they could do. He felt helpless, not knowing where I was or if I was safe. Every night, my dad would sit in the living room, looking at old photos of me and my mom. He remembered how much I looked like her, how she would have known what to do. He wished she was there to help him, to guide him. He started to realize that maybe he had been too harsh, too quick to judge. He thought about the things he had said to me, how they must have hurt me. He wished he could take it all back, but he didn't know if I would ever give him the chance. One day, he decided to clean out my room, hoping it would make him feel better. But as he went through my things, he found the makeup and the clothes I had hidden away. He sat on the bed, holding them, and for the first time, he really thought about what they meant. He realized that I had been trying to tell him something important, something about who I really was. He wished he had seen it sooner, that he hadn't been so blind. My dad began to feel a deep sadness, a regret for the way he had reacted. He wished he could go back and change things, to be the dad I needed him to be. He sat in my room for a long time, thinking about all the moments we had shared and all the moments we might never have again. He started to look for me. He went to all the places he thought I might go, talked to people on the streets, asking if they had seen me. He put up flyers with my picture, hoping someone would recognize me. Every day, he would come home, hoping to find me waiting there, ready to talk and start over. But the house remained empty, and his heart grew heavier with each passing day. My dad began to understand how hard it must have been for me, living in a home where I couldn't be myself. He realized how brave I was to leave, to go out into the world alone. He felt proud of me, but also scared for what I might be facing. He thought about the things he needed to do differently if I ever came back. He promised himself that he would listen to me, really listen, and try to understand. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was willing to try, for me. As the weeks went by, my dad's anger turned into worry and then into a deep longing to see me again. He missed me more than he ever thought possible. He just wanted me to come home, so we could start again, so he could be the dad I needed him to be. Every night, he would look out the window, hoping to see me walking up the path to our house. He kept the front porch light on, a sign that I was always welcome back, no matter what. He realized that he loved me just as I was, and that nothing could ever change that. He just hoped it wasn't too late to tell me. After weeks of searching, my dad finally found me. It was a cold evening, and I was sitting on a bench in the park, wrapped in an old jacket I had found. I looked up and saw him walking towards me. My heart was beating fast, and I didn't know what to do. "Sam," he said, his voice soft and unsure. I just looked at him, feeling a mix of emotions. I was scared, angry, but also a little bit relieved to see him. He sat down next to me, keeping a little distance. "I've been looking for you everywhere. I was so worried," he said, looking into my eyes. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to run away, but another part of me wanted to stay to hear what he had to say. "I'm sorry, Sam," he continued. "I was wrong. I didn't understand, and I reacted badly. But I've missed you so much. I just want you to come home." I looked at him, surprised by his words. I had never heard my dad talk like this before. He seemed different, softer. "I don't know if I can," I said quietly. "I don't know if things can go back to how they were." "They don't have to go back to how they were," he said. "We can start new. I want to understand, Sam. I want to try." I felt a lump in my throat. This was what I had wanted to hear, but I was afraid to believe it. What if it was just words? What if nothing really changed? "It's not easy, Dad," I said, looking down. "I can't just stop being who I am." "I know," he replied. "And I don't want you to stop being who you are. I just want you to be safe and happy. That's all I've ever wanted." We sat there for a long time, not saying much. It was like we were both trying to figure out what to do next. Finally, I said, "I'll come home, but things have to be different." "They will be," he promised. "I'll do better. We'll figure this out together." The walk back home was quiet, but it felt different. Being back home felt strange at first. My room, the house, even the smells and sounds were all familiar, yet everything felt different. I was different, and so was my dad. We were both trying to understand each other, to start anew. My dad made an effort to talk to me more. He would ask me how my day was and listen, really listen, to what I had to say. It was nice, having conversations without fear or anger. We were learning about each other in a way we never had before, but it wasn't always easy. Sometimes my dad would forget and call me by my old name, or he would look at me in a confused way. It hurt, but I could see he was trying, and that meant a lot to me. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out Patreon for a lot more content and early access to YouTube videos.